lukewarm takes. I don't know. Does anybody my age care about Richard Pryor in 2024? That's the question that rolls through my mind as I sat and watched the remake of The Toy, because boy, at one point in American comedy history, somebody said, Richard Pryor's a big deal and he needs to be the lead in this movie. Directed by Dick Donner, of all people. Richard Donner, Dick to his friends. It's to say I don't get Richard Pryor's appeal is not the point. I will say, to kind of bury the lead right here, boy, this is not going to be like the last couple episodes we've done on Francis Weber where I can advocate for watching both. Let's just get out in front of that one. On this episode of the Culture Cast, I am still your host, Chris Dashy, much to the chagrin of many, and I'm joined by the man who puts the Mike White in Mike White May, the projection booth's Mike White.
You got a lot of hair on your upper lip there, little lady.
And all the way from Wake Up Heavy, not talking about horror movies on this show. He's talking about The Toy and Les Jouet with us. Wake Up Heavy's Mark Begley.
Eric bought a black man.
And yes, if you do not know what we're talking about 1976's Les Jouet and the remake from 1982, The Toy.
Richard Pryor is out of work and out of luck, but all that's about to change when he becomes The Toy. What a pair, Richard Pryor and Jackie Gleason in a riotous comedy, The Toy.
The films are both effectively similar in the setup. One has Pierre Richard being bought by a rich child. One has Richard Pryor being bought by a rich child. One rich child's father is Jackie Gleason. The other one is Michel Bouquet, plays Pierre Rambal Cochette, who is the Jackie Gleason analog in the original. And the film is about a down-on-his-luck journalist who is in the wrong place at the wrong time, who gets bought by a rich child to be his, quote, toy, unquote. And the machinations and comedic stylings continue from there. Mike, I always give you the opportunity to speak first on these episodes in terms of why and what and who. So tell me a little bit about your thoughts on The Toy, first time you saw it, why we're doing this one, if there was a reason other than it has a remake, which was your answer last time.
That's pretty much it, Chris.
Still the same answer, huh?
Answer every single time. Yeah,
I think it's fair this time because now it feels like less of a, I picked this one specifically because, like I said, this might be the worst thing one of these might be the worst thing we've seen this month.
Well, spoiler alert, the one that was the best out of all of these was the one that we didn't watch, which was the new Toy from 2022. That one's actually really super good. I like that even better than the 76 version. But it was very interesting going back and looking at this 1982 version because I can't even tell you how many times I saw this movie. I might have seen it at the theater because I would have been 10 years old when this came out, but I definitely saw it on cable a lot when I was growing up. But I haven't seen it in probably 30 years, so it's pretty uneven. But the original, the 76, I again had a good time with this. Not nearly as good of a time as I've had with other ones. This is a little bit more serious Weber at times, and even a serious Pierre Richard. But I was really happy to see Michel Bouquet because I just saw him in a film, Malporti, I believe it's pronounced. It's a Belgian horror film that stars, barely stars, but Orson Welles is in it. And he brings a lot of creepy energy with him in that movie. And I think he even brings creepy energy with him in this movie. I was convinced as I was watching this, I was like, was he in Salo, 120 Days of Sodom? But no, he just looks like one of the creepy guys from that. He almost has a lazy eye, not quite, but yeah, I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say about these movies.
All right, Begley, I interrupted your watch earlier when you were watching it, so now I get to ask you, what are your thoughts on Les Jouet and The Toy?
Well, first time watch for the original, obviously, well, not obviously, I guess, but first time watch for that, I know I saw The Toy in the theater, and I think it was mainly because of Richard Pryor. We were somewhat of a Pryor household because of his films with Gene Wilder that were played on TV a lot. And so I was 13, and I can't imagine that somebody dragged me to it or whatever. I'm sure I specifically asked to go see it because it's, a young kid and Toy and Richard Pryor, all the combination. And in my brain, I remember being somewhat disappointed with the film, even as a 13-year-old. without really, a lot of cinematic background or anything, just kind of finding it silly and not all that interesting. But I think like Mike probably caught it on cable, one of those that just gets repeated over and over and over again. And so I must have seen it at least 3 or 4 more times as a younger teenager, because I remember some things very, very specifically on rewatch. And it's kind of a dud, and I definitely prefer the original and the charm of the original and the charm of the lead in that much more than the remake. But it wasn't a bad couple of watches.
How about you, Chris?
Yeah, I first time for both. Again, and I want to say this just, again, right here. I've never watched a single bit of Richard Pryor stand-up before watching this. When I was done watching this, I went and watched some of his stand-up, and look, his stand-up's amazing. Obviously, there is no question that the man was a genius when it came to stand-up comedy. However, in terms of it translating into this role, I don't think it works. I think that he comes off more disinterested than Pierre Richard does, but Pierre Richard somehow is more endearing in his disinterest because he eventually comes around. And I think what's funny is the American remake has to change the entire ending of the film because it would have made no sense if they had. I would love to have seen them try to get there. Because the way I interpret the end of the French one, correct me if I'm wrong, he straight up leaves his dad and is like, yeah, I just want to be with this guy who has nothing because he actually loves me like a parent. And there is no character arc for the father in the original. He doesn't get a story arc the way that Jackie Gleason does. And I think what's interesting is that seems to almost be the point of the 1982 film, is to get Jackie Gleason's character to become a better father, when the original didn't give a shit about that. That wasn't the point at all. Actually, the movie doesn't even interest itself in that question. It makes it very clear at the end, that's not even the point of this movie. And I appreciate that the original is a much more mature story and a lot less of a by the books story. The way the American one ends, well, I can go hang out with him every now and then. Like, no, like, this is so weird. It doesn't even work the way that they try to get there. And that's because I think that the story the French movie is telling is a serious story about a child who is being neglected. And Pierre Richard sees that. It's not that Richard Pryor in the remake doesn't see it. I just don't think he gives a fuck, because that's kind of the energy he's giving, is that this is just a job for him. And Pierre Richard, by the end of the French one, I'm like, yeah, that kid should go with him. That dad is a real asshole. And Pierre Richard clearly loves this child. And as weird of a thing as that is, children get adopted all the time and kids are put up for adoption all the time. And if he's emancipating himself from his own father, I mean, okay. So it's just a weird concept that the original, I think, embraces more and has less of a problem getting on board with. And the American one, obviously, because it is a remake of the original, it has the benefit of the original existing, which we've talked about before. And I just don't think that the American one does enough to justify its existence. And frankly, what it does do is it dumbs down the concept and kind of makes it for kids more so than the original is. The original is not for kids. The remake, I mean, if you guys were 12 to 15, perfect age to see this kind of movie. Like, it's Richard Pryor, but he's not saying the stuff that he says in his stand-up. That's for sure. I mean, one of the ways he opens his stand-up is just goes, I sucked a dick before. Like, there's none of that here. It's very neutered, which is weird. It'd be like George Carlin being in this movie. Like, what the fuck? Like, this is so antithetical to the way that they conduct themselves in every other, state of what they do professionally. So it just, the American one just seems like a weird take on the French one that's already a weird concept. I didn't dislike either. I think there's one that's clearly superior, but unfortunately, I think the superiority of one is so apparent and obvious that I can't advocate in a lot of ways checking out the American one because it doesn't offer very much.
I'd like to look at just the French one for a little bit, if we're all right, because this
yes, please.
It's interesting because first off, this was Weber's directorial debut,
right?
So first time he's like luckily he wasn't like other people where it's like, oh, you're ruining my movies, but my screenplays when you direct these things. But he was like, I think I can do this. And so he did it. And I thought he did a very capable job. I thought that everybody was directed very well. I thought the shots were selected well. There were some very interesting things that he's doing in here. But for me, like, yes, there's the father and son stuff, and that is definitely a part of this movie. But for me, it's much more the telling part of this movie for me is the Native American in the toy store. The Native American in the toy store, a human being who just hangs out in a toy store. It sounds like he lives there.
Wow, I think so.
Yeah. And when Pierre Richard comes in here to do a story on the toy store, and he's got his, his photographer buddy and all this kind of stuff. And he comes in, he's just like, oh, I'm with you. And he starts to speak English to him. And, he's like, oh yeah, we're together. I'm, Americans are bad, basically. Like, I'm your friend here. And then he comes back later on dressed as a fucking cowboy, as
is hilarious.
Kid's toy. Yeah. And the cowboy and the Indian looks so disappointed in him, just like, thought you said you were with me. And that relationship is almost the exact same relationship that I'm seeing when it comes to Richard and the newspaper, Richard and his co-workers, especially the guy that I was just talking about with like the silver hair, and like they are getting fired like crazy. The one guy gets fired because his hands are sweaty. It's really, for me, all about labor and the relationship between people that want to work. Like, he's desperate to find a job. Francois Perrin is desperate to get a job and get in there. And he keeps being like, oh no, you can't have a job here. You have to shave. No, you can't do this. Okay, yeah, you can finally have a job. And I was surprised he actually got the job and he's doing all this stuff. And then it's like, no, now you're going to work directly for the big boss of the paper, who will come in and shake somebody's hand and fire them for having a sweaty palm, or insist that people shave their beards. He's like such a micromanager of all this stuff, completely clueless. I think another very telling scene is when he's trying to, this is Michel Bouquet as Pierre Rambaud Cochet, when he's trying to speak to the two guys that are working at his property, and he just keeps confusing them and mixing them up, and he has no idea who these fucking guys
Doesn't your daughter have angina? Nope. And then he just goes, just the fucking bushes aren't straight. Bye.
Yeah.
He just becomes so frustrated. He just reverts to being a dickhead and just fucks right off.
So it's like, great, you've got the child story, and that's interesting. You've got the father and all that, but for me, it's much more interesting when it's like, here's this party of hoity-toity people, and we're going to disrupt this party. And it's interesting. There's an analog for that in the Donner toy, but so different and much more racially charged. And we'll talk about that, I'm sure, because we have to talk about it. But yeah, I really like that. It's much more about like, basically, they created this newspaper called The Toy to, take this guy down and talk about unfair labor practices and how everybody is his toy. I thought that was a great metaphor for everything. And that's where I'm at with this 76 version, right?
Yep.
So it's telling multiple stories all at one time, and I really enjoyed that.
There is some subtlety to the French one that the American one sorely lacks, which is exactly what you've gotten to, which is the idea of the story is this kid sees the way his dad treats people and decides that he's going to emulate his father to the point of, I'm going to buy this human being.
Yeah.
And then his father should be seeing that's a problem. And in the French one, he doesn't. And that's the point, is that people that are like that will continue to be like that. No matter how many times the judge tells them to stop, they will continue to be repugnant pieces of shit all the way down. And that's what I appreciate about the original one. It's a serious story. I mean, yes, there are funny moments, and I would say it's a comedic film, but it really is the way that power imbalances affect relationships between people. And when the power imbalance is so large, people can feel enabled to treat people like objects or toys, if you want to boil it down to something childlike. But the movie could have been called The Object, and it would have been the same thing. It's just what happens when people stop being people to you and they're just another thing you can exploit. And the American one gives no shits about that whatsoever. The American one is like, well, I got Richard Pryor, so let's make him do funny things. It's like, you do know that the original movie's not really that funny, right? Oh, okay. Well, we'll try to make it funny. Like it's the American one's trying so hard to be a comedy, and the French one is trying its hardest to not be funny, frankly. Like it has more heart than the American one does. The American one's just kind of a Richard Pryor vehicle in the way like the three of us do a Chevy Chase vehicle movie, like the same thing. It's like, oh, who's the big guy of the times? Richard Pryor. What's he going to do? I don't know. Put him in this movie. Now, people show up because it's Richard Pryor.
Yeah, where was he in his career at this point? Because I know he had already lit himself on fire, so...
Before we get into Richard Pryor, though, real quick, the other very telling scene for me in the Jouet is when the father is basically showing his son how he should be. And it's right towards the end of the movie. Like by the time the father should know better, he's going to that house and going in with his son going, I'm going to buy your house, 300 million.
Well,
and the guy's like, can we think about it? Nope. You have 30 seconds. Can we have till 5:00? Nope. It's one-time offer. And it's basically like, this is how you treat people, son. This is when you have money, this is what you can do. And it just is, it's chilling that this is 1976 and it's way worse today,
Yeah.
it's the divide between the rich and the poor in all three of these movies, because I do want to talk a little bit about the new toy towards the end, but they are all really, I mean, we can talk about that with the Richard Pryor one too, the economic disparity. And I think the economic disparity gets bigger as these films go on, because Richard also fucks up because he goes in and basically gets his wife fired because he thinks that he's going to get this brand new job. They're like, oh yeah, we're going to sign a contract here within a few days. He's like, oh, that's great. And then he goes to his wife's work and takes his Coke bottle and shakes it up and sprays it in what he thinks is her boss's face. No, it's another guy. Regardless, I think she would have been fired. But he's like, I'm the big baller. I'm the breadwinner here, hon. Like, you're not going to work anymore because I'm the man. And then he gets turned into a toy.
I guess I thought that scene at the house was a flashback. I thought...
was it?
I think so. But not that it matters. It illustrates what his dad does. I got a little confused at the beginning. I think I turned away for a second when he first shows up at that factory where they're having the lunch, and this is when is it Francois?
Yeah,
Perrin gets introduced to his new boss, and
when you're watching these movies, you could either say Perrin or Pignon. It's one of the two guys, because they're almost always Perrin or Pignon. Yeah, the table thing, and which is analogous to what they do in the American, but yeah, please feel free.
Yeah, well, is it the same? Does he pull the table towards them? Because I'm like, why is everybody? What happened to why are their meals misplaced? And I thought he had maybe taken somebody's seat or something. Then I was like, oh, it was probably the same thing in this, but that idea of like pulling a table toward you instead of scooting your chair, was sort of a perfect little encapsulation of this guy and those types of guys. And the thing with the house, I was just like, oh, this is really gross. Mm-hmm. And the same with the his right-hand man in both films, where he asks him to disrobe, and of course, he does, because it's just that bad out there.
Yeah.
Mark, you are 100% correct. I believe that's him telling Pierre how they got the beautiful house, and then they flash back to that. So I apologize for it. Does happen late in the film, but I thought it was
like literally the third act, pretty much. And that scene is crazy to me because there is nothing like that in the American one. They never, and that's the thing. Like the French one really goes out of its way to paint the father, the Michel Bouquet character, as like he's not, there's no chance for him to change. That's not what this story is. And I like that ultimately is part of the point that the movie is making, is that sometimes people aren't going to change, and you have to know when to be done yourself and go, okay, I'm not changing this person. So if you're not going to change, I'll remove myself from the situation. And that's a very mature conversation to be having, especially about a child character. Again, because he's got to be what in the American one and the French one, he's probably the same age, like 7 or 8, maybe. 9
I
or
would
10.
think
Like,
so.
yeah,
9 or 10, I think.
yeah, he's a pretty young kid. So in the French one, like it's I find it interesting that he's able to pick up on what the reality is because the plot is giving him that autonomy to go, okay, I can make that choice. And when given the opportunity at the end of the movie, he does. But you actually see throughout the movie, him and Pierre Richard are forming a genuine relationship. And that's because Pierre Richard doesn't take any shit from him. And I'm not saying that Richard Pryor in the remake does, but Pierre Richard has a firmer hand than Richard Pryor does in the movie. I think that contributes to the character because, again, in a real world where these real things would be happening, if this guy is being put through the ringer like this, he is going to get upset. He is not going to want to have to deal with it. And he's going to find a way to make the situation livable for him. And one of those things is, again, pointing out the fact that the person that you're idolizing is a fucking asshole. Because that's what Pierre Richard effectively does. He's like, your dad's a dick. And we'll point it out to everybody. And again, it's not that there's not that in the American one. It's just the French one, I think, gets to the point and lives in the point a little bit more comfortably than the American one has any interest in doing.
Yeah. So like you were saying, Mark, there's that whole scene of him pulling the table towards him. And in the French version, they all just adjust. And at that point, Pierre Richard as Perrin is working for this guy. It's just basically one of the first times I think he's seeing this guy and seeing his behavior, and everybody just adjusts to him. But in the Donner one, Richard Pryor pulls the table back and starts this whole fight between the two of them right off the bat. And even though, like you're saying, Chris, that Pierre Richard takes a much firmer hand with the child, it's kind of Richard Pryor taking a firmer hand with Jackie Gleason just to set them up as antagonist and protagonist right off the bat. I mean, that's really early in the film. It's almost maybe the first time that those two characters see each other. And you have to yuck it up by putting Richard Pryor in drag and having Ned Beatty trying to cover up your mustache and all this stuff. And it gets real bad real fast.
Tedious. It's tedious.
It's very tedious.
Him throwing the fried chicken and the back and forth with the table and
it happens multiple times.
Yeah, the humor in the remake is so much more ham-fisted than the original. And like Chris, like you've mentioned, the original really isn't all that funny. There's a little bit of that slapsticky stuff with Richard, but I kept expecting it to go more because, the French love Jerry Lewis. So I'm thinking, oh, this is going to get silly. And it doesn't. If people haven't heard me say it enough, that's one of my least favorite forms of comedy is slapstick, but nothing in this bothered me. And I don't know that I've seen that guy in anything before. So he was a pleasant surprise. I really like that actor, and I'm going to watch some of the other ones that you guys have up because I know he's in like most of them.
Yeah, he's in a lot of them. He's in the tall blonde man with one black shoe. He plays the role that Tom Hanks would take over. And you know what? In comparison to those two movies, these two couldn't be any more different. Like the man with one red shoe and the man with one black shoe, those movies are pretty much the same. These two movies, very different. And I don't know if it's like, I'm not going to say it's partially Dick Donner, but Donner's direction doesn't add anything. There's nothing here that it's workmanlike. I mean, if anything, I think Karel Sobieski's script might be kind of the issue. But just looking at all the things that she's written, like she's a pretty well-known screenwriter. So this is not, in a lot of ways, like this is kind of atypical for her in terms of quality. I think the issue is they tried to make the French movie into just a comedy. They tried to force the issue. And I don't think it works that way with this, at least. Like the best thing about the man with one black shoe and the man with one red shoe is that the American one was staying true to the French one. And in staying true to it, yes, does it kind of maybe not make a case for itself because it is a remake? Sure, but it follows along closely enough and makes a couple changes that are necessary for it to be more approachable for an American audience, but effectively the same movie. Why they didn't do that here is kind of beyond me, other than just because, oh, it's Richard Pryor, so it's got to be a comedy, which in and of itself is flawed reasoning. I mean, he could be in a dramatic film. That's not a requirement that you have to have Richard Pryor on screen being funny. That's just the expectation. I
Blue
get
collar.
it.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing about Richard Pryor. You just said blue collar. Richard Pryor's best roles are the non-comedy things.
I agree
I mean,
with that.
some call it Loving. He shows up in a little bit. Hit. He's good in Adios Amigo. There's a little bit of comedy, but not a ton. Car Wash, I would say, is like pure comedy role, and he's really good in that.
Grease Lightning, he's pretty good in. It's
Grease
not,
Lightning, I like. Yeah.
There's some comedy, but it's not.
Yeah.
That's not the main focus of that for sure.
It's amazing though to think that, like, I was just looking up like how many movies he was in. They were trying to make Richard Pryor happen hard. So like just between 1980 and 1983, he was in, I think, 7 or 8 movies altogether. Just, and some of these, like Holy Moses, he's barely in, and God We Trust, I think he's barely in. But then you get like Stir Crazy, Bustin' Loose, Some Kind of Hero, The Toy, Superman 3. He's like major player in all of those.
Yeah, and Stir Crazy is one of the ones that we saw a lot and enjoyed. That and Silver Streak. And, it's kind of interesting because Gene Wilder, that's who I saw in this Pierre Richard. I'm like, oh my God, he's like the French Gene Wilder or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And not that he acts that way, it's really basically hair. Just the hair and the look. But
man, that would have been a good option for the American one, would have been Gene Wilder. Jesus, he could have really stood up. I mean, the way he treats Charlie in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory,
right.
like that level of sternness at the end, you could see that coming out of his mouth in The Toy. Richard Pryor never gets there. He gets there with Jackie Gleason if he gets there with anyone. And then again, it's like not the same movie. Don't really care. Like that Jackie Gleason character does not need to be redeemed. He's kind of irredeemable. He's so rich. That's the point.
Well, I mean, that also having Gene Wilder would have avoided the painful racial politics of the remake as well.
Wait, when buying an African-American person has worse tones to it than a white person buying a white person? Really?
I mean, luckily they are aware of it. Like when they are giving him money for him to be the toy, there's a Confederate flag over his shoulder. There's the scene. It happens an hour into the French version where they're having the party and he and the kid are playing cowboys and Indians and stuff. And meanwhile, you've got the protesters outside. That's an hour and a half into the Donner film. And that is a guy who's running for re-election, and the Grand Wizard of the KKK is there as well. We've got
that was
blackface jokes. Holy shit.
Yeah, I mean, it's the comedic denouement of the film, as they would say. I mean, it's like they crafted a bunch of scenarios that they were like, this would be funny if the toy was black. That's what it just feels like. And it's like, I guess it's not that it's not funny. It's just, it's not funny. And like, it doesn't serve a place in this movie either. It comes out of such left field. And again, to your point, Mike, I mean, they injected this themselves into the movie intentionally. This was not there in the original. So you're to blame for making that choice. And it's like the climax of the movie, effectively. Like, Yeah. So tone deaf, even in fucking, good Lord, in 82, it was tone deaf.
And that Jackie Gleason's character's name is U.S.,
Yeah.
And like, I don't know if we ever get what his name stands for, but it's just U.S. And this was also that weird time where Jackie Gleason was making the comeback. Like Jackie Gleason had been with us since the 50s for Honeymooners. I'm not sure what else he had. Yeah, I guess he was doing a lot of movies in the 50s as well. Made that huge splash with the Honeymooners. And then also there was a lot of, there was the Jackie Gleason show. I used to actually watch that on PBS on like Sunday nights. There were things like, Requiem for a Heavyweight. He's doing all this great stuff. And then, eventually comes to like Skidoo, which is horrible. How to Commit Marriage, like it goes a little astray for a while, but then boom, Smokey and the Bandit happens, 1977, and he is just on fire again. And it just becomes holy shit. And you can imagine, and I know the posters for this said like Jackie Gleason, something, Richard Pryor wants to buy Richard Pryor. I mean, it is like, oh my God, Jackie Gleason and Richard Pryor. Can you imagine what a comedy this is going to be, bringing these two powerhouses together? And basically, Jackie Gleason is playing Buford T. Justice through this entire thing. He's just an asshole, likes to swear just to get a rise out of the audience, I guess. We're supposed to find all of his swears to be funny, but the poor guy barely has a character. And yeah, I found when he is on screen, I'm just like, get away from this guy. I don't even care for this person at all.
It's very telling when the tagline on the poster is, when Jackie Gleason told his son he could have any present he wanted, he picked the most outrageous gift of all, Richard Pryor. To your point, it's like they're acknowledging on the poster 100%. You and they know why you're coming to this movie, and they don't make good on that at all. Like, if this were the only thing you'd ever seen of Richard Pryor's, which for me, for the most part, pretty much was, I would sit afterwards and go, so he's popular? Like, he's a popular comedian? Because this doesn't do what he does any justice. And frankly, it feels like taking someone like Eddie Murphy and putting him in a kid's movie. Now, look, that ended up working. Because I think Eddie Murphy is a little bit more malleable than Richard Pryor, but not being malleable as a comedian is not a bad thing. Some stand-up comedians just aren't made to be actors. I mean, I can think of plenty of stand-up comedians that are well known for being stand-up comedians, not for their film roles. Like I mentioned George Carlin. I mean, George Carlin's in, Bill and Ted, but I mean, yeah, but like those are bit parts. He's not the main character or the second lead of the movie. Richard Pryor, I mean, again, from what it sounds like, it may even be a different issue, which is he's better at being dramatic than he is comedic in terms of outside of the stage roles, which is an even weirder issue. But at the same time, like you alluded to, they're trying their hardest to turn Richard Pryor into, I don't know, like a big time screen Richard Pryor, which just wasn't clearly going to happen.
Well, his roles were, I mean, a lot of those movies are pretty darn good. Like I said, though, I don't know if they ever really found the perfect vehicle. I think, to your point from earlier, Mark, I think like Silver Streak and why am I blanking on the other Wilder film?
Stir Crazy?
Stir Crazy.
Yeah, Stir Crazy.
It feels like those were the ones that really used his comedy for the best. I would have been curious because he co-wrote or wrote part of Blazing Saddles and was supposed to be Sheriff Bart, but also Richard Pryor was kind of his own worst enemy. He was unreliable, as far as I know. Now, this might be like an apocryphal thing, but I believe the story was, I mean, the guy did set himself on fire freebasing. So I think there's a little bit of truth to this, that he's kind of dependent on drugs a lot and like just wasn't reliable coming on set and things. So I can see why they were like, yeah, no, we're going to cast Cleavon Little instead. Thank you very much, Richard, because the insurance would be off the charts with you because nobody trusts you. And I think he finally got over that quite a bit. But yeah, just some of the roles that he was taking, I was like, like, again, like Some Kind of Hero was kind of fun. I watched, what was the one? Watched another one recently of his, and I was just like, this is just all over the place with tone, because it's like, he's a funny guy. He wants to do funny things. It's like him with that Wonder Wheel or whatever it is in this movie, where he's just like, it's like, okay, well, I guess this is a funny scene, and how he's like, oh, you're going to give it a proper burial and all these things. I'm like, I guess these are funny lines, but they just weren't hitting at all. And seeing him dress up in a Spider-Man costume and stuff, I'm like, all right, well, that's nice and humiliating, but like the even that scene where it's like Pierre Richard seems so much more humiliated when they push him into the room with all of those other people when he's wearing the Snoopy pajamas and stuff, and the new wife is like, look, and my husband, what he bought for his son, so different in tone to me than when Teresa Genzel as Fancy Bates does the same thing, but it just doesn't land the same.
Well, and I think Pierre Richard has a little more meekness to him in a way. And I don't know if it's getting more of his story. I mean, the first part of the film of the original, it's all on him. I don't think at the time, you would be prepared for what comes when he's at the toy store. This seems like it's a labor thing. It's a work thing. I don't know what was going on in France at the time. Mm-hmm. Maybe there was labor shortage. I always think of The Tenant around the same time, and there was stuff going on in that movie that government and strikes and things like that. And
all post 68 stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you get more of that and his whole interaction with the guy from the bank, that he's trying to wine and dine to give him
right. And he has to make that guy pay for it. Yes.
Yeah. And then he's starting to write the check, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, before the banker even said anything, I'm like, you're writing a check? And he's like, what are you doing? Why are you writing a check? It's gonna bounce, But you get, there's none of that. It's very limited in the remake, where Pryor is down on his luck and looking for work, but it just doesn't have the same social vibe at all. And so him getting in the original, Pierre Richard getting knocked down, just for whatever reason, seemed to have more weight to me. Like he's really. We've seen him take it on the chin a couple of times already. And you don't really get that with Richard Pryor. You just get, he can't find work. It's really bad out there. And, maybe the scene with Ned Beatty is a little humiliating, their interview, but it's not set up as strongly that he's just constantly being knocked down, either by others or by his own kind of silly mistakes.
Chris and I were talking a lot on the Dinner for Idiots episode, or Dinner for Schmuck / The Dinner Game, which maybe by the time this goes up, I think it should be over at patreon.com/culturecast. And you can hear us talk about 2 other Francis Weber films. But we were talking a lot about how dumb do you play the character. I don't see Perrin, the Pierre Richard character in this one, I don't see him as dumb. I really don't see him as dumb at all. But then you look at Richard Pryor, and again, starts off with him, playing games with his friends and just like how broke they are. He finds out that his brother-in-law is going to sell the house and all this, played by an uncredited Tony Burton in such a
jazzercise
thing. Yes, a jazzercise class led by a very fey man at the front. I'm like, oh God.
Of course.
But
that was a pretty funny scene, actually.
It was. And I love Tony Burton. But to see Richard Pryor driving around or riding around on his bicycle with his headphones on and constantly like causing chaos. I mean, he is an idiot in that section of the film. Completely clueless, doesn't know that any of this stuff is going on. And then later on, like right afterwards, like when he's not doing that whole sequence, he's not stupid. And
right.
But yet, at the same time, that these are both newspaper men. I'm not saying that because Richard Pryor is African American that he shouldn't be working at a newspaper, but it doesn't feel like he talks about working at a newspaper very much. Like when he goes in to interview with Ned Beatty, I'm just like, okay, what is this job? It feels like he's desperate for anything. Even he's going to be a maid and stuff. And I'm just like, no, you stick to your guns. It should be like, I'll write copy for the local flyer, or I'll do this, or I'll do that. But instead, he just feels like, I need a job. I don't care what job it is. Maybe it'll be a newspaper. And I'm like, no, you're a newspaper man. You should have ink for blood kind of thing. Like, show me that you are that person, and that maybe you stick to your guns so much. Maybe you're so hard-headed that you won't look for other jobs and you only want to work at a newspaper because that's your passion.
Yeah, well, and I think that the journalism of it all gets lost in the American one pretty much at the beginning.
I don't know why they even have him be a journalist. Just have him work at the toy store.
So they can pay it off at the end by not paying it off at all. Like
they miss so much with the social commentary in the remake. It could have just been gone. I mean, when his wife and the protesters show up in the remake, he gets them out immediately. There's no real tension there because he's like, I'm going to take care of it. So go. That didn't need to be in there. He could have figured out who these people were that were showing up at this party on his own and set out to destroy it. His backstory doesn't lend to the movie in the way that Richard Perrin's does in the original at all. It could have been excised. And this movie's 9 minutes longer. So, I mean, if you want to add up the time that the stuff at the beginning with his wife, and I did like the name of her group or whatever, the Clan Watch. And I was like, oh, that's going to come into play later. But that and the protest and everything else didn't really need to be there. It could have just been, I need, my house is going to be sold. I need money. I've got a job, but it's not enough. I might get a second job at this toy store, working nights or something.
And that's what I don't like about the American one is, like you mentioned, Mark, the American one has nothing to say. And that's because it's literally not interested in saying anything. I mean, there's that scene between Richard Pryor and the child actor who plays Eric Bates in the US remake, Scott Schwartz.
Master Bates.
Yeah, Master Bates. Pretty good.
Well, and if you know where he ended up in films, that kind of takes on a whole other turn.
Yeah, like Christmas Story. Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Playing Flick, if you know what I mean.
Oh, he's flicking something.
Yeah, flicking something for sure.
I haven't seen much more of his work, especially his more adult fare. So
I have not either.
Scotty's X-rated adventure.
Yeah, it's like him and that kid from
Fright Night.
Fright Night. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
you're so cool,
Yep.
Brewster. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there, in that scene, Richard Pryor is asking him why did you, and he's like, because I wanted a friend.
Why did you?
There's none of that in the French one. He's doing it because he's trying to prove a point to his father. In the American one, it's like you've undercut the entire possible social commentary of the movie in this one scene by having the kid just go, I just was lonely and wanted a friend. Like, did we think Americans in 82 were too stupid for some social commentary to be injected into their movie? Because it's been vacuumed out of this movie completely. I mean, there's a moment where Richard Pryor is about to spank Scott Schwartz, which comes out of nowhere, and then he doesn't do it. And there's nothing like that in the original one because that's not the point of the movie. It's so weird to me that they just missed the point completely. Because again, I think they thought, well, we've got Richard Pryor, so it has to be funny. But Richard Pryor's an observational comedian. He is literally, he made the use of the N-word in art form in a lot of ways. I mean, some of his titles of his albums are literally another word and then the N-word. Very few people, if anyone, can get away with that. I don't think anybody could get away with that now. And I mean, then it was pretty controversial even. But just by the way he conducts himself, Richard Pryor understands his place in the world and what he can do to do better, possibly. I mean, you've already alluded to the fact that he was obviously troubled by his own demons, but he is a comedian who his ability to be observational, but also smart about the comedy is why he was so successful and why so many people talked about him being literally the comedian. Plenty of comedians, I'm sure, looked up to and still look up to, but it feels like a missed opportunity to direct this into a comedy slant when it isn't really comedic even to begin with. And that they tried to force the movie into this box is so strange to me because at the end with the Klan, this doesn't serve anybody. This isn't serving any plots. It's not serving the main story, that's for sure. The scene in the remake has nothing to do with the overall movie. The scene in the original, it is part and parcel with what's going on in the original movie. These rich people are completely fucking awful and don't want anything fun or different around them. And that's what you see in the original. In the remake, it's played in a completely different way that feels, again, like a contrived scene without a lick of comedy in it.
Well, so that whole thing, that whole dinner with the Klan section or party with the Klan, because that's what they like to do, ending with the golf cart stuff going on, and that this just makes no sense to me that the kid ends up in the pool, Jackie Gleason ends up in the pool, Richard Pryor fishes the kid out and he's like, hey, I can't swim, and then he falls in and you see Jackie Gleason underwater just call him a dumb son of a bitch or something, and then you have Pryor going what, I can't hear you, and you can hear them speaking to each other underwater, and then cut and it's Jackie Gleason with the shotgun and Richard Pryor walking in, but then it's oh no, I'm not going to hurt you. You saved my life. And I was like, really? You couldn't get out of that golf cart in the pool? What? Yeah. You saved his life? Okay. And then it's well, here, let me tell you how to be better for your son. And it's interesting because that scene of let me show you how to talk to your son and cuddle your son and all that, they actually use that in the new toy, in the 2022 toy. So they took the best parts of the 76 and the 82, not to say that there were many good parts of the 82, but took that all together for the 2022. And rather than this whole thing of, I want a job, please give me a job, Mr. Rich Executive type of thing, it's basically, there's a guy who, and he's played by, I'm trying to remember, Jamel Debbouze. Most people will know him. He was in Amelie. He's been in a ton of stuff. He's the actor, a little darker complected. His family's from Morocco, and his right arm doesn't work, so he always keeps it in his pocket. But his wife is pregnant, and so he's trying to be better for the child yet to come, and then also seeing this stuff going on with the father and son, and he's really just like trying to help them out more than anything. Like, he doesn't start a newspaper. He doesn't do any of this kind of stuff. He's basically like, here, let me try to help you, son, be a better person. And then here, father, let me try to help you connect with your son, to the point where he's like, there's a big soccer game on tonight. Like, you should come, you should be there. And like, the guy has no idea how to cheer for teams or anything. He's just like totally clueless, the father this is, on how to work with anybody. And it's kind of a fascinating thing that they changed it around so much, but made it a much better movie. I don't know which one I like better, the 76 or the 2022, but both vastly superior than this 82 version.
Well, what's crazy, it sounds like with the new one, is they kind of give up the fact that the original one's idea isn't necessarily the best way of telling this story anymore. And It has to evolve with the times and the way times are. And that's the thing I was sitting here thinking to myself, like, and I think some of the best movies that we've watched put us in the position of the people in the movie. I was thinking to myself, how would I conduct myself if I was Pierre Richard in Les Jouet? I think I would conduct myself the exact same way that he does, which is, trying to understand the situation that I'm in by understanding the situation that this kid is in and what I can do to kind of bridge the gap and do better. And he does do better. And in the original, the dad doesn't care. But in a new version of that movie, I would find it hard. I would find it hard to get the audience to that point, because it's not that it's not a good ending in the original. It's just, it's a strange ending, because the child does emancipate himself from the father, and we're to believe that he literally leaves his father to go be with Pierre Richard. And I mean, look, there's like a lot of stuff that goes into that just, again, like legal things. So in the original, like, it just kind of hangs a lantern on it, and there's no scene past the hug with Pierre Richard and the kid. In the remake, there's no way they could do that again. They would have to kind of toe the line between the two. And I'm glad to hear that that's the case, because again, I don't dislike the idea in the American one of making the father actually trying to do better and maybe amenable to doing better. I like that idea. I think the French one doing what it does makes perfect sense for a French film coming out in 76 in terms of like what it's trying to say and embrace. But the fact that the new one kind of does something even different, but it's essentially just remixing both of them together, is smart. Now, the question I have is, does the new one feature the Michael Jackson song that Jackson wrote for the Richard Pryor one that they didn't use, that up until like a couple of years ago was unheard completely? Came out on Thriller 40, and you know what? Not a bad song. I actually kind of wish it was in the movie. It's very We Are the World.
Anything would be better. Anything would be better than that song they chose for the opening of that.
Yeah, it's very boy. Ben, We Are the World. It's like a very nice Michael Jackson song. But, I mean, if you have Richard Pryor and Jackie Gleason and Michael Jackson, I mean, that's the thing. The original Toy, successful. The American version, also successful. I mean, not critically, but financially, made a lot of money, was a financially successful film, which I think does speak to Richard Pryor as a comedian at the time.
He was bankable. That's why he's in all those movies in that time period. Can I admit to being very, very dense?
Yeah.
I didn't take that away from that original ending. I just thought he was kind of like, what can I do? He likes me more.
I don't know.
I keep mixing up his name. It's Pierre Richard.
Pierre Richard.
Call him Richard Perrin.
Gene Wilder.
And that's not even his character's name.
French Gene Wilder.
The French Gene Wilder. That flew right over my head. I was just like, oh, sorry, dude. It rang to me like there was no redemption for the dad. Like I knew there would be in the American version. One thing I remembered, because it has to be that way.
Right.
But I just took it as more of a French type ending. Like, what can I do? He likes me more than he likes you. I'm not even doing anything but being me. So
Right.
I didn't even really think of that next step of like, he's basically saying, fuck you, dad. I'm living with him now.
Well, and what's funny is like, as someone who I don't want kids of my own, but I have been around my friends and their kids, or my sister and her previous boyfriend had a kid. So many of them were like, we want to stay here and hang out with you because you're so much fun. And it's like, what am I doing? I'm not doing anything. I'm just existing.
I'm not doing anything. Leave me alone.
I'm not doing anything intentionally to curry favor with you. I'm treating you the way I assume you want to be treated, which is I actually pay attention and I listen to you and I don't just ignore you the way a lot of adults treat children. And I think that I see that more in the Pierre Richard role than I do in the Richard Pryor role. Because again, Pierre Richard is engaging with the child actor on his level, and it never feels like Richard Pryor is engaging with Eric Bates on his level. It's always like, I'm trying to be the go-between between you and your father, which is the point of the American film. That's the point, is that both of them come together in the end, but there's still a little place in his heart for Richard Pryor. I mean, whether or not Pierre Richard in the original is actually the child's father now, obviously is beside the point. I mean, again, I just think it goes there for me because, again, he's like, you could go with him or you could go with me. And the kid just fucking doesn't even think twice. He just zips out of there. But yeah, I guess it's, I mean, again, the ending is up to interpretation. I completely agree with where you're going with it as well. Because, I mean, again, at the end of the day, the intent of the two movies is so different that the endings are really different too. Because you couldn't do the original's ending with Richard Pryor. That would be weird.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it would have been very appropriate to have a Michael Jackson song for that movie where you've got the older black man who sleeps with the younger white child.
Wow. Wow. Hot takes, everybody. Mike White's got him.
Where's the monkey, though?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because that never comes up in any of these, which I'm glad for, that we don't have to address, like, you could be a perv. And,
Right.
Well, the background checks on this. Yeah, the bath scene and everything.
I didn't remember the bath scene from the remake, so I was like, what's going to happen here when I watched? I think I did this backwards, too. I watched the original first yesterday and enjoyed it much more, so it would have been nice to end on that. But anyway.
Yeah, I've been watching the American ones first, by the way, just so you know.
Since it's a French film, I thought, well, I don't know. They could get into their underwear at least and have this be really awkward. But, it got played for more of a laugh and as a goof on the, the snooty maid or whatever.
Oh boy, that character, the Nazi sympathizer in the
that was
Donner
weird.
one.
Oh, and she was. Is it true what they say about you people? Oh, it's true. It's true. What the fuck?
Are you brown all over?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for reminding me about the worst part of the American one.
She
God.
so reminded me of what was the lady's name on Benson, where she was German as well. Yeah, that was bizarre.
I kept thinking of the gal, speaking of Chevy Chase, in Oh Heavenly Dog Up in Heaven. For some reason, that's what I kept thinking of, because she was Germanic too, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think she got into Nazi stuff. She's watching Hitler on her TV.
Yes.
I was surprised, though. I was surprised at how many things from the original showed up in the remake, because I thought watching the original and not really remembering the remake all that well. For one thing, I didn't think Richard Pryor was a journalist in the remake. And, the car stuff and just so many of the scenes are played. They end up being so weirdly different in the remake and not landing. I think because that connection is not being made like it is in the original. It's like he's trying to figure out what's going on with this kid, as a reporter, like what's the deal here in the original, and that's missing from the remake.
Yeah, then having to break into the newspaper office in the remake.
Yeah,
that kind of goes nowhere, and we're going to escape from the prison, and there's going to be no consequences. They didn't take anybody's fingerprints or names.
And thank God no one got shot.
Yes. Oh my God.
Throwing firecrackers on a police station.
The other thing, sorry to keep harping on this, but the other thing I really liked about the 2022, the new toy, is also they address where is the mother, because they talk about that in the Donner one. I'm not sure if they talk about it in the Weber film, but in the Donner one, he's just like, oh yeah, I had this crazy wife and I left her locked up in a sanatorium before I went into the strip club and saw this beautiful girl with big knockers and propellers on her boobs. And I'm just like, what the fuck? In the 2022, it starts at her funeral, and there is damage to the child and to the husband because of the loss of the wife. And it just becomes this big deal that she's gone. So you don't have the two wife characters from the Weber and from the Donner. So you don't have that relationship either, which is kind of interesting. So there is nobody to push him into a room and embarrass him. There isn't that dinner time conversation. And yeah, you feel the loss. There's one part where the toy in the new one is just like, oh my God, look at all this stuff. Look at the view that you have. Look at all these beautiful statues that you have. You've got, his room in that one, because it can be CG, is wild. And he's just like, look at all this stuff you have. And the kid runs away and he's just like, I've got all this stuff, but I don't have my mom. And my dad tried so desperately to save her. He kept sending her to all these clinics. I didn't get to see my mom when she died. I'm just like, wow, that's really devastating. And I was just like, this, again, you're elevating this material so much. It was really, really well done. And I liked the wife character, or the new wife, I should say, in the 76 version, but in the Donner version, now I love that actress. And I used to love whenever she would show up, especially on Johnny Carson. But I was just like, okay, I'm never connecting with you. And I don't know if you're an ally or an enemy at any time. Kind of the same thing with Ned Beatty. I'm like, are you an ally or are you an enemy? And then poor Wilfred Hyde White. I'm like, I know you always play doddering old men, but are you actually doddering in this one? Because you're not doing anything other than like, yeah, oh, that was your breakfast. I'm like, oh my God. That's like, they're trying to starve Richard Pryor in his version more than anything. It's like, well, that was your dinner. Well, now the kid's taking the plates off of the table. Oh, sorry. It's like, you should be, oh my God, where are the Madeleines? Where's the food at? I need something.
I just, yeah, it's so tonally a mess with outside of the main characters. Like, I mean, you have Ned Beatty in this movie, and he is
wasted,
nothing,
wasted,
completely wasted. And I mean, we talked about the ending of the original where we have, this kind of touching moment. I think it speaks volumes how the American film ends, where the gag is now he's going to do this all the time, I guess. And it's like, first off, you're getting paid to be a glorified babysitter. Thousands of dollars. Please tell me how this is actually a problem for you. Because I'm just going to go out on a limb and say this much. I've already alluded to the fact that for whatever reason, kids seem to think that I'm hilarious. If somebody asked me to take care of their kids for thousands of dollars, yeah, I'd do it. In a fucking heartbeat, I would do it. Like, or what am I, a fucking moron? Like, do I want a real job, or do I want to get paid a lot of money and probably taken on trips by people for free because they expect me to take care of their kid and they don't care? Yeah, you know what? I don't know how bad this job really sounds. Like, that's probably the big takeaway. In 2024, doing this job, you're just a nanny, bro. Like, that's all you are. It's the toy. They could have recalled this movie The Male Nanny, and it probably would have played just as well. Because again, he's not the kid's toy. There's never that scene in either movie that I was expecting where it's like the kid is literally just telling him to do embarrassing and like demeaning shit. And they never get there in either movie, really. Like, that's not what it's about. And in my mind, it's like, why even call it that then? Why is the poster Jackie Gleason controlling Richard Pryor? Like, that's not even, this movie never even goes there. It never even attempts to get into the realm of that kind of commentary. And the original does, but the original still is not, this child is controlling him. That's like, he buys him.
He orders him around. He does order him around quite a bit.
Yeah. But like, again, I mean, I'm pretty sure, again, like if you're if you're a kid's nanny, like I'm pretty sure you're at their beck and call. Like, that's my point. Like, ultimately he is just like a babysitter, but in the original, he feels like more than a babysitter. And that's in the remake. It's just like, he's just kind of like an in-house nanny for this kid. And then at the end of the movie, they go, hey,
the au pair.
Yeah, really? Like, again, at the end of the movie, we are led to believe Richard Pryor, in a Looney Tunes-esque moment, is running down the road. I mean, it literally zooms in on a circle like Looney Tunes. It's like, this isn't...
Well, and that fast motion stuff that they do in the remake, and 3 or 4 times, the sped up comedy, him running on top of the water.
Oh,
that whole fishing scene was bizarre. Talk about some things that are not from the original. That was one with the piranhas. I'm like, what is the fucking point of this? Just to run into Ned Beatty by chance?
Seems like it.
Yeah.
Seems like it.
That's where we get, he's fired somebody because they had sweaty hands. They've got to bring that back. And
yeah, because you don't really, do you see that moment in the Donner version? Or
no,
he's
just relaying it, which is weird, because why not just say you got fired for some reason?
Exactly.
I guess they have to have the scene a little bit later where he's removing his pants in front of them this time, which actually that is humiliating, because in the original he's just doing it in the guy's office and because he was told to. But Ned Beatty has to do it in front of the kid and Richard Pryor, and I gotta say that one hit a little bit harder than the scene in the comparable scene in the original.
Well, and again, it's the original. Again, there's lots of moments in the original that just, when they show up in the American one, it's like, this isn't going to work as well here, guys, because you just haven't set up the stakes the same way. The movie is not trying to do the same thing. So I get that you're trying to be true to the source material, but why?
Because we don't see the workings of the newspaper in this like we do, the first third of that film. The first act of that film is him at the newspaper trying to break into the newspaper and secure a job so that he can, get his bank situation sorted out. And it's not, Richard Pryor doesn't go in for an interview for the paper. It's to be a cleaning lady.
Yeah. It's so strange.
At his house, which I found odd. I thought, he's going to be a cleaning lady at the building.
Right.
That's going to morph into him cleaning the toy store.
Exactly. Yeah, that would have made sense, Mark.
Well, yeah. Yeah, that toy store scene is odd, too, like you mentioned, Chris, with him playing with the stuff by himself. He thinks he's by himself.
Why? It's it's not funny. It's not funny. And Richard Pryor is not a prop comedian. How I know? I watched that scene and he's not funny. They're just like, what can we do to make Richard Pryor funny? Well, not this.
That was one of the things I remembered, though. So I thought, he's going to do that in the original, but he doesn't. He knocks the mannequin's head off, but he's not goofing around and playing when Eric shows up. Thankfully, they're named the same thing in both movies. He's just standing there. And the kid is like, so that goes kind of, Chris, to your whole point about that's not why he's saying, I want this guy. He's doing it because they said I can have anything I want. And this is what my dad does. He buys people. He buys people off, lets them go for no reason, or, this, that, and the other thing. Who cares if they're human beings?
Well, and the American one also does this thing where they show them handing out the papers all over town. It's like, nobody would fucking care.
No,
who gives a shit? It's, again, it all feels so contrived in the American one, to the detriment of the movies. The entire point of the movie is completely ignored.
No, I was going to say that's because they haven't set up the newspaper as kind of the hub of this film like they did in the original.
Yeah. The newspaper's a fully formed idea in the original. In the remake, it's just a building that they're in sometimes.
I was so glad that in the 2022 remake, I don't even know what the guy does, what the father does. There's no talk of newspaper. And I was so afraid that it was going to be, because the kid runs a YouTube channel. So I was like, oh, fuck, it's going to be all about fucking YouTube and social media and shit. And there is stuff about social media. There's some footage that gets leaked, but it gets leaked by a bodyguard who, after the Pignon character leaves and the bodyguard gets fired, because I think the Pignon character was playing the piano that only the wife could play, so they kick him out, and then it was like, why didn't you stop him? So they fire the bodyguard, and then the bodyguard releases this footage and it becomes a viral thing. But it's Instagram, it's YouTube, it's all these different things, but it's not the son, and it's not the son becoming this YouTube Crusader or something. So it was just a moment of like, we are now humiliating this person in front of everybody. Like, how dare you become this guy's toy? And there was a scene where he was acting like a dog. So they're just like, you're this guy's dog, and they're just making fun of him like crazy. He like lives in ignominy. But then it happens to spark like, how could this guy treat this other human being like that? And then it becomes the labor stuff towards the end of the movie. And I'm like, yes, this is again how you structure it. Whereas, yeah, by the 82 version, drop the newspaper. It really doesn't make any sense here. Like you're saying, yeah, taking it all over town. Whew, boy, we were really tired. We put all those papers out everywhere. And I'm like, yeah, who's going to give a shit other than the people working at this place? And they probably know all this stuff anyway.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, the American one, I think, unfortunately, this is one of those times where not we, but we as the people who made this movie, as American filmmakers, we missed the point of the original and dumbed it down. I mean, what's funny is when we did our Patreon episode on Le Dîner du Cons and Dinner for Schmucks, man, this movie makes Dinner for Schmucks look like a fucking masterpiece.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of the way it's interpreting the source material and doing something different with it. Because Dinner for Schmucks is nothing like the original, the dinner game. And in a lot of ways, like, this movie is nothing like the original either. But Dinner for Schmucks is how you actually do it right, which is show us something we haven't seen. Expound more upon ideas that are hinted at in the original. I mean, the original, they never even leave the apartment. We never see the titular dinner that they're talking about. The American one gives it to us, and it actually is entertaining. Like, it's probably one of the better parts of the movie. In this movie, they don't ever rise to the occasion that the French one does, the American one. All we have is Richard Pryor mugging for the camera and being this kid's friend. And then by the end of the movie, he is saddled with this kid for the rest of his life, is what it feels like. Pierre Richard, yes, he kind of one-armed hugs the kid at the end of the movie and kind of throws his hands into the air, but he made his case for why he's doing what he's doing, and it makes sense that the kid went with him. Is he maybe a little flustered that it happened? Sure, but he has no one to blame but himself. I don't really understand why the kid likes Richard Pryor at the end of the American one. Richard Pryor doesn't really ever resonate with the kid emotionally the way Pierre Richard does in the original. And it kind of undercuts any sort of emotional resonance that the movie has, which is we're watching someone transform the life of one person. In the American one, it's two, but I don't need that other person transformed in the American one because it doesn't go anywhere. And laser focusing the original on the kid and the relationship between the kid and the toy, I think is smart. And to your point, Mike, like, the occupation of the dad in the American one is so fucking unimportant. Why? Who cares? Mm-hmm. Like, who cares? You don't do anything with it. So what? Oh, because in the original, that was a newspaper thing. That's why. Okay. Again, why are you paying lip service to a movie no Americans saw? That's what I don't get. It's not like Let the Right One In and Let Me In, two movies that you could see both of them. And a lot of people had. This is like no one in 82 is seeing the original Francis Weber film. I don't know why you're hewing so close to the original when you don't have to. Like, it's unneeded, completely unneeded. And I think the movie would have benefited by them just going, we have a guy who gets bought by a child of a rich asshole, and that's the setup. And go with that. Make something that feels uniquely American, not like they're trying to make this work in America the way the French film made it work in France. And there is something weird about a black adult with a small white child just walking around there. It's just bizarre. Like, it doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Well, it prompts Richard Donner to call the police, right? Wasn't that a cameo by him? Am I mistaken?
You're right. Yeah.
I was waiting for that. I'm like, oh, that guy just walked on by. That's interesting. And then, of course,
right.
There was a nice comedy pause there because then he comes back. Yeah, I didn't know this was a remake, actually, until being invited on this show. I knew about The Man with One Red Shoe, and isn't there a Gene Wilder one about a red dress or something? That's
Woman in Red, is that a remake of a French film?
I want to say so. I could be confusing it with The Man with One Red Shoe.
Because I get those two movies mixed up, probably because of the red and probably because of the slapsticky of it. But yeah, I had no idea, speaking of Richard Pryor, I had no idea that Brewster's Millions was a remake as well. That was just a few
Neither did I until recently. Yeah.
Great movie. Actually, I like Brewster's Millions quite a bit, mostly because probably John Candy. But The remake, I thought was pretty good. The original, I thought was very good.
Another one of his films I saw in the theater, and I think I just found out it was a remake a couple of weeks ago. It played on something, and I looked it up by chance to see when it was released, and it's like, oh, another remake. Okay.
And here's the other thing.
say
And
so.
I'll just be out and open with this. I haven't seen enough of Donner's stuff, frankly. Like, I have never seen the original
He's
Superman.
got a weird filmography.
Yeah, he does. Looking at
It's
his
a lot of
filmography.
peaks and valleys.
Yeah, because we watched Lethal Weapon. I had never seen that up until a couple years ago, and you and I did that together, Mike. Conspiracy, didn't we?
I don't think so. I think you talked to me about it.
I did Lethal. I don't know
Goonies.
who the hell did I do Lethal Weapon with. Then I thought it was me and you. Or we always quote the second one back. And diplomatic immunity.
Exactly.
That shit's
Now
hilarious. No,
That is something, yes.
yeah. But like looking at Donner's filmography, it's so bizarre. Like it's literally all over the place. Radio Flyer,
Lots of different stuff.
conspiracy theory,
Oh,
He's a
boy.
working director.
timeline, folks. I saw that in theaters.
16
read the book.
blocks.
16 Blocks I really liked.
That's his last movie, technically.
Scrooged,
Yeah, Scrooge is interesting. Yeah, Maverick
Lady
I
Hawk.
thought was pretty good. I haven't gone back to it forever.
The Omen.
The Omen, the Goonies, and Lady Hawk were just like, whoa, hey, these are very much on cable all the time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And obviously he was involved. I mean, he was one of the names involved with the reboot of Tales, or not reboot, but the initial run of Tales from the Crypt. And he directed couple episodes, 3, and then and then he directed one of the ones in that thing that they tried to do with Bill Sadler, where it was like action Tales from the Crypt, which didn't work. And then they took that segment and repurposed it back into Tales from the Crypt. And then he also produced the kid version of the show, the game show, and then the science version of Tales from the Crypt that ran for only one season. Perversions of science.
Oh, as opposed to what's
I should have been Tales from the Lab. Come on. Come on, guys. Come on.
as opposed to
Goddamn.
Misfits of Science, one of my favorite TV shows.
There's an episode that has Paul Williams in it called Given the Air, and it's I want to say it's a movie or it's an episode where a woman is turned into a man or vice versa, and it's just like that's the twist. And it was like, whoa! I was like, what is this fucking shit? It ran in 97. That episode was there was a couple episodes directed by some weird people like Toby Hooper, William Shatner, Sean Astin, and Russell Mulcahy. So Donner has a weird filmography overall. It's kind of, I mean, I wouldn't say he's like Zemeckis, but I mean, I think Zemeckis was a little bit more consistent in quality, even if it's not high quality. Like Richard, like we were talking about that recently, Mike, with Zemeckis just maudlin boomer bullshit at this point.
Yeah.
Just, oh my God.
Side moves.
Fortunate son in Forrest Gump is not on the nose, we swear. He fucks. God. Yeah, this, I get it. I get why they remade it, but it feels so weird to me that this is okay, I don't know. It's not, I think The Toy, the American remake is right now, I think it's the least successful thing we've watched this month by far. I think it's like very far.
3% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Oh God. Jesus.
I mean, we have yet to get to those
People
Martin
that care
Short
about that
movies.
shit.
I'm curious how those are going to be.
I mean, on Wikipedia, it says that the film was pilloried by film critics.
Wow.
Fillery. That's great.
good.
Yeah, I mean, like Jesus. I mean, I've heard them say it's panned, but pilloried. My God, like
Yeah.
Pilloried and filleted.
yeah, like, good Lord. Yeah. No, I mean, I think it deserves 3%. I think it does.
I don't know
It's
about
not
3%.
It's not funny. I mean, it's an uncomedic, funny
I
film.
laughed a few times.
In 2 hours, though.
Maybe I'm easy. What's that?
In 2 hours, though. I mean, that's a 2-hour movie, man. It's only like
Yeah,
15
I don't know
minutes
why it
shy
was
of 2 hours.
Why was it 9 minutes longer than the original?
Yeah.
Yet it seems like there's
exactly.
less in it.
For all those
Yeah.
jokes that the American film added,
I guess for
right?
I guess for the fishing scene and the police station scene, that probably added the 9 minutes
yeah.
right there, 8 minutes right
Oh,
there.
padding. Yeah. Though I would highly recommend that you guys check out the new Toy from 2022. A lot
Well,
of
I
fun.
like that guy. I had to look up who you were talking about, and I'm like,
Right.
oh yeah, that guy.
Yeah, exactly. As soon as you see him, and then that's interesting too because he's he's brown. And like there's that whole thing too. Like he's part of the underclass. And so you get to see like all of the underclass. There's like a whole bunch of people, and it's not just because like other than like there are the people that are there with Clan Watch with Richard Pryor's wife, but like we don't really get to know them, but we really get to know some of these other characters, especially our main guy's wife, and you know, get to see her. And there's this beautiful scene where he touches her stomach while she's sleeping, and then the baby's hand pushes back, and it's just so lovely. So I'm getting a little choked up about it, but it's just like, this is really good.
Well, we get to know the people in the newspaper in the first one, too, a lot better than we get to know any of Pryor's cohorts. So,
yeah.
And, which helps, you know, create a picture of the Pierre Richard character in that. So,
yeah, to see how he actually works with other people or talks with them.
Yeah, or just, you know, how he interacts with other people. He seems caring and concerned.
It's Richard Pryor just playing himself. That's what it is. That's really right. Like ultimately, like he's not playing a character, and that's the problem. Like the more I sit here and think about it, like why was it such a box office success? Because of Richard Pryor. But why has it been quote pilloried unquote? Because it's not a funny Richard Pryor thing, but you have to go watch it to find that out. Like that's the thing. Like on the face of it, like we've already alluded to, like this is the right thing at the right time. These two actors, Jackie Gleason and Richard Pryor, like should have been a good movie. People came out like it was.
Check out Stir Crazy, Chris. You might like that one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to see the stuff that he's good in. Like, you know,
I think between Stir Crazy and Silver Streak, I remember Stir Crazy being the one I enjoyed catching more often. And what is that guy's name? The big guy that died young. He was in The Running Man and a couple other films. I think he was a wrestler or something before.
The tall, bald guy who's in like the Wanderers? Yeah. Boy, that guy was scary. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, he's in Stir Crazy. And
he looks like Fat Guy Goes Nutsoid, but I don't think he's the same dude.
It is. Anyway, not to get too sidetracked.
I can't believe I just fucking dropped Fat Guy Goes Nutsoid.
Erland van Lith.
Very
born
good.
in the Netherlands.
Yes.
Yeah. 1953
Yes, the opera
to
singer,
1987.
Yeah.
Yeah. Grossberger and Stir Crazy.
I'm trying to remember what his final line was, because I know the ice skater guy, or no, it was Harold Tanaka, was, "Here is Sub-Zero, now just plain zero."
It's almost as bad. It's almost as bad for Dynamo in there, because he's like got the electrical power stuff.
Yeah.
It's cheesy. No, Running Man has the worst Arnold one-liners.
Oh, it has some of the worst, but it has some of the best. It does have some of the best, because what he says to Richard Dawson is still my favorite Schwarzenegger line. "You better leave some room for my fist, because I'm going to ram it into your stomach and break your goddamn spine." I mean, that right there is I mean, and the way Schwarzenegger says, "Hello, cutie pie."
Way too long.
I mean, it is too long.
Like we're going to talk for half an hour here before I finally get to the
Hey, man,
one
What's the punchline, Arnie?
Gotta set it up, man. I like when he says "Hello, cutie pie" to Richard Dawson, though. That's pretty good.
Oh, you know why I can't remember Dynamo's death line? Because he doesn't kill him. He shows mercy. So then they have to re-edit it and then show that he killed him later on, remember?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that movie in a long time.
I thought he had a bad line in that one too. Oh well.
Oh,
I mean,
I'm sure
I need to watch it again.
He does.
I can't wait to watch the remake.
I'll be there.
I'll be there too.
When it hits streaming.
I mean, it's going to be directed by Edgar Wright, so
Yeah, I just heard a podcast where these two assholes were talking about Edgar Wright for like an hour and a half.
right?
Jesus.
Just the most insufferable fucking people you could imagine.
Man, oh man.
And they were trying not to gatekeep too. Can you imagine trying to do that with film stuff?
Oh,
God,
no.
talk about a losing fucking proposition.
We are the arbiters of taste. If you don't like what we say, get the fuck out.
True, you caught us. So on that note, Begley, final thoughts on Les Jouet and the Toy.
Check out the original. It's charming.
What about you, Mike White?
Check out the original. It's charming. Check out the 2022 version. It's also charming in a whole different way.
Yeah, I will, because I like that guy.
Yeah, I'm going to check it out
He's
as
one
well.
of my favorite parts of Amelie.
We
I'm going to check it out only because, again, like I want to see a version of this done differently, but done right. And this is not that for sure, fortunately. But again, like I said, I did go out and watch other Richard Pryor stuff. So at least there's that. It did introduce me to Richard Pryor, who I had really not watched a lot of his stuff before. And yeah, he's fucking hilarious, but his stand-up's funny. I mean, Richard Pryor here and now, pretty funny. Like all of his stand-up is really great. So I see why. I don't get why it is the way that it is, but there is a version we can watch, and there's another version that I'm excited to check out. So yeah.
Well, real quick, isn't there that's right. There's an amazing, bringing us back to our other podcast, one of the other podcasts that we do, the Chasing Chevy Chase podcast. There's an amazing SNL skit between Richard Pryor and Chevy Chase called Word Association. You really need to watch that.
Yeah, that is a classic.
Yes.
That is a classic skit.
Anything with Chevy and Richard Pryor sounds pretty great.
It's good. It's good. That episode itself is not all that good, but that particular skit it's shown on all the, best of episodes when they do those.
Also, Richard Pryor's interpretation of the alphabet on the Electric Company, if I remember, I think it's Electric Company in Sesame Street or something. So good. So good.
So on that note, we'll take a break, play some ads, and play a preview for the next Culture Cast.
Hi, I'm Susan.
And I'm Sharon. And we're the hosts of 80s TV Ladies.
Check us out wherever you find your favorite podcasts.
And please like and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at 80s TV Ladies.
You can find interviews and exclusive behind-the-scenes content on all of your favorite 80s TV ladies.
80s TV Ladies is the place to go. Please join us.
80s TV Ladies.
Hi, this is HP from Noise Junkies.
And this is Father Malone from Dark Destinations.
Please join us as we examine one of the greatest sitcoms in television history, Taxi, on Night Mr. Walters, a Taxi podcast.
Good night, Mr. Walters.
Good evening, and welcome to Night Gallery.
Thank you, Rod. And I want to welcome everyone to Midnight Viewing, where once a month we talk all about your follow-up to The Twilight Zone, Rod Serling's Night Gallery.
They say it's Rod Serling's Night Gallery, and it isn't really Rod Serling's Night Gallery, it's somebody else's.
Oh, we know. We talk about it a lot. Your curators at Midnight Viewing are the projection booth's Mike White.
What can happen to human beings when trust is wiped out by suspicion?
And CultureCast's Chris Stashew.
Small boy encased in a crystal ball.
And I'm Father Malone.
The kind of thing that usually infests nightmares.
Join us monthly at Midnight Viewing, the Night Gallery podcast at weirdingwaymedia.com.
Doesn't remotely belong to me. I have no proprietary interest in that at all.
These two men have been hired to find a missing heiress. One's a detective searching for clues.
Open the door.
The other's an accident waiting to happen.
There's no quicksand in Mexico.
Congratulate me, because I just discovered something.
Martin Short and Danny Glover star in the new comedy from the writers of Twins and Kindergarten Cop. Pure Luck.
Right on the next Culture Cast, it'll be Mike and I once again, and we're going to be joined by, speaking of the people who are talking about Edgar Wright, we'll be joined by my dear friend Ryan Verrill, who I work on film foundations with. We're going to be joined by him to talk about Pure Luck and La Chèvre, which, I think it's another Pierre Richard thing, right? This is Pierre Richard and Gerard Depardieu, is it not?
Oui.
Oh, oui.
Is it about a goat? Isn't that what chèvre?
I think chèvre, it means that, yeah.
Yeah. Le fromage de chèvre is goat's cheese in French, so it must be. Until then, where can people find you and the things that you work on, Mr. Mark Begley?
You can find my shows, Wake Up Heavy, Cambridge and with Sean, and the Chasing Chevy Chase podcast over on Weirding Way Media.
What about you, Mike White?
.com.
Sorry. Not .org.
Same
net.
thing. Also over there, the .org, .edu, .tv, all that stuff. Any of those they won't work. Don't try that. Just go to weirdingwaymedia.com where you can find all the stuff that I also work on, except for the one show that Chris and I do with our friend Richard Haddam, which is called Rankin' on Bond, where we talk about James Bond films. That's available at both of our Patreons. The one I remember the most is patreon.com/projection booth. Head on over there and hear us talk about Bond. Otherwise, come on over to weirdingwaymedia.com and hear everything else. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, no, same bag, different way of saying it, weirdingwaymedia.com. That's where my stuff is. Other than, Rankin' on Bond, which is on patreon.com/culturecast or patreon.com/projection booth. And like, rate, and review the show on iTunes, regardless of where you get it. Give us a moment, head on over to iTunes, help us out, leave a review, good or bad, but every review helps us find our audience. So, Mark, thank you so much for joining us. This has been fun. Unfortunately,
thanks for having me.
Movie wasn't as great as I think we were all hoping it would be, but good conversation. And we talked longer than both movies. So
kind of knew. I figured I'd enjoy the original more.
I'm glad that you like the original at all. So that's good.
Yeah.
Have you guys read the trivia for La Chèvre?
Not yet.
Oh boy. The first trivia thing on here is pretty fucked up.
Oh boy.
Jeez. I hope it's real and not made up like so many of the trivia.
I don't know. I hope it's made up because it sounds awful.
Well, I guess we'll have to figure out what that is.
You guys to investigate. You might want to bring it up on your episode.
Jesus, that is something. Wow.
So if you want to know what that thing is, folks, I guess you'll have to check out the next episode.